If you have been feeling more anxious than usual, if a low mood has settled in that you cannot fully explain, if you wake up some mornings with a heaviness that has nothing to do with what happened the day before, I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I am about to share may change how you understand what is happening inside your body. Most people, when they feel this way, look upward, to stress, to grief, to circumstances, to getting older. Very few people look downward, to their gut. And yet the research is now clear that the gut and the brain are in constant direct communication. And after 60, the gut changes in ways that quietly but powerfully disrupt that communication, in ways that can look and feel exactly like depression, anxiety, fatigue, and brain fog. What I am going to tell you today is not alternative medicine. It is not fringe science. It is peer-reviewed biology that is reshaping how the medical community understands mood disorders in older adults. And it starts with a connection that most doctors never have time to explain. I'm Dr. Hayes Anderson, and after 22 years in senior health, I've seen firsthand how deeply gut health affects every other system in the body, including the one most people never think to connect it to. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how your gut communicates with your brain, why that communication breaks down after 60 in ways that affect mood and mental clarity, the specific factors that accelerate that breakdown, and 5 strategies ranked by impact that can begin restoring that connection starting today. I need to warn you now. Strategy number 2 is the one most people find genuinely shocking because it has nothing to do with food. Stay with me all the way through. Here is the truth that almost nobody explains clearly enough. Your gut is not simply a digestive organ. It is the largest neurological structure in your body outside of your brain. The gut wall contains more than 500 million nerve cells, more nerve cells than your entire spinal cord. These cells form what researchers now call the enteric nervous system, or the second brain. And this second brain does not simply receive instructions from the brain in your skull. It sends more signals upward to the brain than it receives going down. Approximately 90% of the signals traveling along the vagus nerve, the long highway connecting gut and brain, travel from gut to brain, not the other way around. What this means in practical terms is that what is happening in your gut is directly shaping how your brain feels. Not metaphorically, neurologically. The state of your gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and microorganisms living inside your intestinal tract, is actively influencing your stress response, your emotional regulation, your sleep quality, and your capacity to feel calm, motivated, and well. And after 60, that microbiome undergoes a series of changes that the research is only now beginning to fully document. The average appointment with a primary care physician is about 15 minutes. There is rarely time in that window to explain the gut-brain axis, let alone connect it to the low mood or anxiety a patient brought in to discuss. So a prescription gets written, or a reassurance gets offered, and the root of the problem stays untouched. But before I tell you what changes in the gut after 60 and why it matters so much, let me tell you about Beverly. Beverly was 67 years old when she came in. She had been managing what her previous doctor called mild depression for about 2 years. She was on a low-dose antidepressant that she described as taking the edge off, but not really lifting anything. She felt flat. She had lost interest in things she used to love, her garden, her book club, Sunday dinners with her family. She slept too much but never felt rested. She was not sad exactly. She was just absent, like the volume on her own life had been turned down. She had also been dealing with chronic bloating for years, constipation that came and went, and a sensitivity to foods she used to eat without any trouble. She had mentioned these symptoms to doctors before. They had been addressed as a separate problem, a digestive issue, entirely disconnected from her mood. When we looked at everything together, the picture became clear. Beverly's gut microbiome had been significantly disrupted by a combination of factors common to women in her age group: a course of antibiotics 2 years earlier, a diet that had shifted toward processed foods as her cooking motivation declined, and a chronic low-grade inflammation that was silently running through her digestive tract and sending distress signals directly to her brain. Her gut was not a separate problem from her mood. It was the source of it. This is what researchers now call the gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication network between the enteric nervous system, the vagus nerve, the immune system, and the brain. And understanding how this axis changes after 60 is the key to understanding why mood disorders in older adults so often resist the treatments that work in younger people. Here is what happens to the gut after 60 and why it matters more than most people realize. The microbiome, that ecosystem of trillions of microorganisms living in the intestinal tract, is not static. It changes with age in predictable and well-documented ways. Research consistently shows that by the time a person reaches their 60s, the diversity of the gut microbiome has declined significantly compared to earlier decades. The populations of beneficial bacteria, particularly the species that produce short-chain fatty acids and the neurotransmitters that influence mood, have shrunk. The populations of inflammatory bacteria have expanded, and the balance has shifted in ways that generate a low-grade chronic inflammation that researchers have given a specific name: inflammaging. Inflammaging is not the dramatic inflammation you feel from an injury or infection. It is quieter, slower, and in many ways more dangerous because it operates below the threshold of noticeable symptoms for years. It is measurable in blood markers: elevated C-reactive protein, elevated interleukin-6, elevated tumor necrosis factor. But these markers are rarely checked in routine senior wellness visits. And this chronic low-grade inflammation does several things to mood and mental health simultaneously. It disrupts the production of serotonin. It impairs the function of GABA, the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. It elevates cortisol, and it slows the brain's ability to regenerate neurons in the regions responsible for emotional regulation and memory. This is not depression caused by circumstances. This is depression caused by biology, and the biology is rooted, in significant part, in the gut. There is more. Approximately 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut, not in the brain. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter most commonly associated with mood, well-being, and emotional stability. The gut produces it from dietary tryptophan, using specific beneficial bacteria as part of the manufacturing process. When those bacterial populations decline, as they reliably do after 60, serotonin production declines with them. The brain does not produce enough serotonin on its own to compensate. The result is a mood state that looks and feels like depression, but originates in a place that antidepressants alone cannot fully address, because antidepressants work on serotonin signaling in the brain, not on the gut's capacity to produce the serotonin in the first place. Stay with me, because now I want to walk you through the 5 strategies that the research most strongly supports for restoring gut-brain communication after 60. I have ranked them in order of impact, with the most powerful saved for last. And as I promised, the second one will likely surprise you. Strategy number 5 is the one most people already know about, but are doing in a way that is far less effective than it could be: fermented foods and probiotic support. The gut microbiome needs live beneficial bacteria regularly introduced to maintain diversity and crowd out the inflammatory species that expand with age. Fermented foods, plain, unsweetened yogurt with live active cultures, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, traditionally fermented pickles, are among the most direct ways to do this. The research on fermented food consumption and mood is compelling. A 2022 study published in the journal Cell found that a high fermented food diet significantly increased microbiome diversity and decreased markers of inflammation over a 10-week period in adults, more effectively, notably, than a high-fiber diet alone. For seniors specifically, daily fermented food intake has been associated in multiple studies with lower rates of depression, improved sleep quality, and better cognitive performance on memory tests. The critical word here is daily. Introducing beneficial bacteria once a week does not maintain population levels. The gut ecosystem requires consistent daily replenishment, particularly after 60, when the body's own capacity to sustain bacterial diversity has declined. One serving of plain yogurt at breakfast, a tablespoon of sauerkraut alongside lunch, a small glass of kefir in the evening. These are small, inexpensive habits that compound meaningfully over weeks and months. If probiotic supplements are preferred over food sources, the research supports strains from the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium families for mood-related outcomes specifically. But quality varies enormously between products, and supplements in this category should be reviewed with a doctor, particularly for anyone who is immunocompromised or recently post-surgery. Strategy number 4 is prebiotic fiber, and this is where most people make a mistake that undermines everything else. Beneficial bacteria cannot survive and multiply in the gut without fiber to feed on. Not all fiber. Specifically, prebiotic fiber, the kinds of indigestible plant compounds that beneficial bacteria ferment to produce short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are not just digestive byproducts. They cross the gut lining, enter circulation, cross the blood-brain barrier, and directly reduce neuroinflammation, the same chronic low-grade inflammation that disrupts serotonin production and impairs emotional regulation. The best prebiotic food sources for seniors are ones that are easy to eat and easy to digest. Slightly underripe bananas, cooked and cooled oats, garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, apples eaten with the skin, and legumes in moderate portions. The key is variety. Different bacterial species feed on different prebiotic compounds, so diversity of prebiotic sources translates directly to diversity of the bacterial populations that benefit mood. Aiming for 25 to 30 grams of total fiber daily, with a meaningful portion coming from these prebiotic sources specifically, is the target supported by the research in this area. Let me introduce you to Thomas, 71, a retired engineer who came in frustrated. He had cleaned up his diet significantly over the previous year. More vegetables, more whole grains, less processed food, and his physical health had improved measurably. But his mood had not shifted. He still woke up anxious. He still felt that low-level heaviness in the afternoons. When we looked at his fiber intake carefully, he was eating plenty of fiber, but almost all of it was insoluble. Roughage from whole grains and vegetables that supports bowel regularity, but does very little for prebiotic bacterial feeding. We shifted his breakfast to include cooked and cooled oats, added a daily banana, and incorporated garlic and onions consistently into his cooking. Within 8 weeks, Thomas noticed something he described as a quieter mind. The morning anxiety had softened. The afternoon heaviness had lifted noticeably. His digestion had improved as well, which he had not expected to be connected. The same microbiome changes that improved his mental state had also resolved a chronic bloating he had accepted for years as simply part of getting older. Strategy number 3 is one that is supported by some of the strongest research in this field and is almost never discussed in the context of gut health: sleep. And I want to explain why sleep belongs on this list specifically, because the connection is more direct than most people realize. The gut microbiome and sleep exist in a two-way relationship that is both powerful and fragile. Disrupted sleep alters the composition of the gut microbiome, reducing beneficial populations and promoting inflammatory species in measurable ways within days. And a disrupted gut microbiome impairs the production of melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep onset and sleep depth. Approximately 400 times more melatonin is produced in the gut than in the pineal gland in the brain. The gut's melatonin production depends on the same bacterial activity that supports serotonin production. When that bacterial activity declines, from age, from poor diet, from antibiotic disruption, melatonin production declines with it. The result is a cycle that is extremely difficult to break from either end alone. Poor gut health worsens sleep, and poor sleep worsens gut health, and worsening gut health produces the mood disruption and brain inflammation that makes sleep even more elusive. This is why seniors who address only sleep hygiene without also addressing gut health often find improvement that plateaus, and why seniors who improve gut health through diet often report spontaneous improvements in sleep that they did not expect and cannot fully explain, because the mechanism connecting the two is working below the level of their awareness. For practical purposes, supporting the gut-sleep connection means taking magnesium glycinate in the evening, which supports both gut motility and sleep depth, eating the last meal of the day at least 3 hours before bed to allow the gut's own circadian processes to align with sleep, and including prebiotic fiber at dinner specifically, as evening fiber fermentation has been shown to support overnight melatonin production. Strategy number 2, the one I promised would surprise you, is stress management. And I need to explain why it belongs here as a gut health strategy, not simply a mental health one, because the mechanism is specific and the evidence is strong. The vagus nerve that connects gut and brain runs in both directions. When chronic stress activates the brain's threat response, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the resulting cortisol surge reaches the gut lining within minutes. Cortisol at chronically elevated levels directly damages the tight junctions in the gut wall, the microscopic connections between intestinal cells that control what passes through and what stays out. When those junctions are damaged, the gut lining becomes permeable. Bacterial fragments, partially digested food proteins, and endotoxins that should remain inside the gut begin passing into the bloodstream. The immune system responds to these intruders with the same inflammatory cytokines that drive inflammaging. And those cytokines travel directly to the brain, where they suppress serotonin synthesis, impair memory consolidation, and activate the neural circuits associated with anxiety and depression. This is what researchers now call the leaky gut, leaky brain hypothesis, and the evidence for it in seniors specifically is accumulating rapidly. Chronic stress is not just a trigger for mood problems. It is a mechanism for gut damage that produces mood problems through a pathway that is entirely biological. This means that for many seniors, stress management is not a soft recommendation. It is a clinical intervention for gut health that directly affects brain chemistry. The most effective stress reduction practices for gut-brain health specifically, based on the research, are deep, slow breathing that activates the parasympathetic nervous system for at least 5 to 10 minutes daily, light movement after meals that supports vagal tone, and consistent social connection. That last one is worth pausing on. Research from UCLA has found that social isolation produces the same inflammatory cytokine profile in the brain as a physical injury. For seniors living alone or with reduced social contact, loneliness is not an emotional problem that happens to feel bad. It is a physiological inflammatory event that reaches the gut and shapes the microbiome. Meet Carol, 73, who had been living alone for 3 years after her husband passed. She had developed what she described as a persistent low mood and a digestive system that had changed completely since her loss. Bloating, irregularity, a sensitivity to foods she had eaten her whole life without issue. She had been prescribed an antidepressant, which helped modestly. When we looked at the whole picture, the grief, the isolation, the gut changes, the sleep disruption, we understood what had happened. Chronic grief and social isolation had sustained a cortisol elevation that had quietly damaged her gut lining. The mood changes and the digestive changes were the same problem expressing itself in 2 places at once. Adding a consistent social activity 3 times a week, a walking group, a weekly dinner with a neighbor, a regular phone call with her daughter, combined with the dietary strategies we discussed, produced changes in her mood over 3 months that the antidepressant alone had not achieved in a year. Not because the medication was wrong, because the root cause it could not reach had finally been addressed. And now we arrive at strategy number 1, the strategy that ties everything together and that the research links most directly to sustained improvement in gut-brain health after 60. The removal of ultra-processed foods. I want to be specific about what this means, because ultra-processed is a term that has been diluted by overuse. Ultra-processed foods are not simply foods that have been cooked or prepared. They are products that contain industrial emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, synthetic flavor compounds, and chemical preservatives that have no equivalent in the natural food supply. And the research on what these compounds do to the gut microbiome is some of the most alarming published in this field in the past decade. Emulsifiers, compounds like carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80, found in a vast range of packaged foods from salad dressings to ice cream to bread, have been shown in multiple animal and human studies to disrupt the mucus layer that protects the gut lining, reduce the diversity of beneficial bacterial populations, and promote the growth of pro-inflammatory species. Artificial sweeteners, sucralose, saccharin, aspartame, have been shown to alter the gut microbiome in ways that impair glucose metabolism and promote dysbiosis, meaning the imbalanced state of the microbiome that drives inflammation. These are not theoretical risks. These are documented mechanisms, playing out every day in the guts of seniors who are eating foods labeled as healthy, low sugar, or light. A 2023 study published in the British Medical Journal, following more than 180,000 adults, found that higher ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 53% higher risk of depression and a 48% higher risk of anxiety, independent of overall caloric intake, physical activity, and socioeconomic status. The mechanism in that study pointed directly to gut microbiome disruption and the resulting neuroinflammation as the primary mediator. This does not mean perfect eating. It does not mean eliminating all convenience from your diet. It means reading labels with one specific question in mind. Does this product contain emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, or synthetic preservatives? And when the answer is yes, choosing an alternative whenever possible. Real yogurt instead of artificially sweetened yogurt. Whole fruit instead of fruit-flavored snacks. Olive oil and vinegar instead of bottled dressing. gradually rebuilding a food environment that supports rather than dismantles the gut ecosystem that your mood depends on. None of what we have discussed today requires a prescription. None of it is complicated in isolation. But together, fermented foods daily, diverse prebiotic fiber, protected sleep, reduced chronic stress, and the removal of ultra-processed emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners. These 5 strategies address the gut-brain axis at every point where aging disrupts it. The fatigue that does not respond to rest, the anxiety that has no clear cause, the low mood that arrived quietly and has stayed, the brain fog that makes everything feel slightly harder than it used to. These are not inevitable consequences of growing older. In many cases, they are the symptoms of a gut ecosystem that has been disrupted and a gut-brain communication system that has lost its signal. That is not a fixed condition. It is a reversible one. You now have a clearer picture of what is happening inside your body than most people who are experiencing these same symptoms will ever receive from a standard appointment. That knowledge is yours to use. What surprised you most about the gut-brain connection today? Leave a comment below and tell me, was it the serotonin production, the vagus nerve pathway, or the link between stress and gut lining damage? I read every comment, and your answers shape the topics I cover next. If you know someone over 60 who has been struggling with unexplained low mood, anxiety, or fatigue, please share this with them. Not for this channel, for them. Because this information could genuinely change the direction of their health. In the next video in this series, we go deeper into inflammation specifically, the chronic low-grade inflammatory state that drives not just mood disruption, but cardiovascular risk, cognitive decline, and joint deterioration after 60, and the 5 foods that research links to the most significant reduction in inflammatory markers in older adults. That one connects directly to everything we discussed today, and you will not want to miss it.